the village of Dushilovo, located in the Rostov region, and abandoned in the early 90s, when the last old women who lived there died of old age, could hardly be called a populated area. Just a few houses, next to a 2-track gravel embankment, is the whole village. Once upon a time, collective farmers lived there, not all the time, only during the period of preparing feed for the winter. The endless fields around provided enough hay for local farms. If there were no farms, there was no village. A rare gypsy camp stopped for the night in abandoned houses that had already begun to settle. Soon they were gone too, and after another heavy snowfall, as is customary in our area, the houses collapsed completely, spreading out like black blots on the frozen, empty ground. What settled under these houses was found by accident. It's just that some unfortunate person coveted a piece of iron covering the corner of a destroyed roof and fell into a cellar dug by someone under the house. Spring was already coming, but the clay walls of the cellar, reinforced by rotten and therefore black wooden beams, still breathed frost. In small recesses, here and there, the stubs of cheap church candles could be seen. In the greedy mind of the ferrous metal hunter, the thought of possible finds flashed and then went out: old icons or at least silverware. But the cellar did not create the impression of a secret sanctuary or treasury, more like graves. But the hunter could not get out. No matter how hard he tried, the brittle clay crumbled under his fingers. Even when he managed to jump to the edge of the hole into which he had fallen, perhaps there is another way out of the cellar, he thought, and took out a lighter. The wrong source of weak orange light snatched the sloping clay walls from the darkness. Several candles turned out to be quite suitable, and in the far corner, the thief saw something that he did not want to see at all: a human body blackened by time. It was sitting in the corner, with its head buried in its knees. Through the scraps of clothing, bones were visible through the waxy skin. But worse than this was the mold, thin white threads, spreading from the corpse in all directions. In the flickering light of the fire, its velvety-looking surface seemed alive. Screaming as hard as he could, the thief rushed back to the hole, slipped and fell, right on the accumulation of mold, jumped up again, and this time he managed to get out, catching his hands on a piece of the same piece of metal for which he came here. Within minutes, he was sitting in his car, breathing heavily and wondering whether to call the police. Deciding that it was not worth it, he started the engine and left the damn village, throwing it out of his head, and the metal and the corpse he found, and the mold that abundantly adhered to his pants and jacket. A dilapidated village house in the middle of a bright yellow field was quickly approaching, accompanied by the howling of air whirlwinds. Dilapidated, long unpainted walls of lopsided houses could hardly withstand the pressure of the wind. The farm seemed residential and completely harmless. Chickens scurried about under the feet of the landing soldiers, and the peaceful mooing of at least 2 cows could be heard from the barn at a distance. A family of 3 sat at the table on the summer veranda, completely motionless, as if not noticing the armed people. One of the military men looked uncertainly at his feet and at the commander. Every step was accompanied by an unpleasant squelching sound, as if both the ground and the floor on the veranda were covered with an invisible liquid. "What you need?" asked the father of the family, without even trying to get up. With sharp movements, he had been smearing non-existent butter on a piece of bread dried to a stone for 10 minutes. His glassy eyes did not look at the people around him, or even at the knife in his hand. Rare convulsions ran through his white, shiny, as if varnished, skin. As the squad approached a little closer, its movements became rougher, but did not stop. The knife cut through the air with a whistle, causing crumbs from his crackers to scatter across the floor like sparks. On command, the soldiers cocked their weapons, and the engineers began to cover the veranda windows with impenetrable film. The father of the family did not object. "What you need?" he repeated with the same intonation, continuing to wave the knife over the bread. "What you need?" "Check." It came from the commander's radio, and he pointed his finger at the soldier closest to him. "Accepted." The fighter slowly walked towards the people sitting at the table. "Alive. No signs of consciousness," he reported, briefly examining the child and approaching the head of the family. The sealed latex glove trembled before he touched the shoulder of the man sitting in front of him, and as if an invisible spring straightened out, twitching convulsively, the farmer waved a kitchen knife. The blood from the instantly cut throat flew in spurts onto the table and walls, squeezing the wound. The soldier recoiled to the side, but this did not save him. Random shots rang out. 2 bodies, one pierced by bullets, a farmer and an unnamed soldier, fell to the ground. Doctors and biohazard gowns ran up, disembarking from another helicopter that had just landed, moving the body of the dead soldier to the side. They took care of the still trembling corpse of the farmer. The members of the unfortunate family who remained in their places looked indifferently ahead, as if waiting for breakfast to begin. The chronology of events was restored by examining the skin of the victims. Remember what I said? She was white, which is extremely atypical for people working outdoors. As it turned out, the cause was an organism resembling a skin fungus. A thin transparent layer, it covered everything around as if with water, just as inconspicuous, but much more deadly. With tubular roots consisting of myelinated protein, it penetrated the skin, spreading its spores through the lymphatic system, which then sprouted in the nerves, uniting with the main mother mycelium apparently located at the site of the primary infection. We found it in the barn, a huge, pulsating translucent bubble hanging from the ceiling, with rivulets of roots stretching along the ground directly to its victims. Part of the barn roof was broken. In a small crater, metal fragments of a meteorite lay on the floor. The main food of the parasite was melanin. By the time of discovery, most of the infected people on the farm were already brain dead. The brain of the head of the family was most terribly affected. It must have been he who first found the meteorite. It contained most of the parasite's biomass. Most of it was in his hands, which suggested that he must have deliberately spread the infection throughout the house. Of course, by this time, he was already dead. Somehow, the fungus was able to replicate some of his neurons with its own processes, forcing the unfortunate man to perform primitive actions and even repeat phrases, imitating living people. Unfortunately, we did not understand this right away. He attacked us again at the moment when they tried to put him on a stretcher, biting one employee and hitting another so that he was thrown to the other end of the room. Jumping to his feet, the living corpse rushed into the street. He was stopped by a sniper as he ran out of the house and headed towards the river. Subsequently, the parasite repaired damaged parts of the host's body several more times, merging bones and neurons damaged during numerous autopsies and attempts to keep it in place. It soon became clear that he would not stop trying to escape. The last straw was his screams. Having recovered from yet another autopsy, the farmer opened his eyes wide and spoke. Nothing definite, he screamed and squealed as if possessed. He threatened, demanded to let him go, and finally began threatening to sue him. Doctors who examined the body said that his brain functions were almost completely restored. The decision came from above, together with the bitten employee and several other operatives who were infected due to faulty respirators. The entire farm was burned, flooding everything, including the fields around it, with high-temperature napalm. I don't want to threaten you because I don't know what would have happened if these farmers had not been discovered before something stole their identity. Perhaps most of you are already infected and simply do not realize it. Or perhaps this was an isolated incident and the next invasion will occur in a couple of thousand years. But don't forget for a second, no matter what living organism we encounter outside our land, most likely, its properties will be far beyond our wildest fantasies.